Hello and welcome back to Talking Europe. It's been a year punctuated by catastrophic weather events, from deadly floods in Pakistan to Hurricane Ian in Florida, and unprecedented heat in Europe. If you'd suggested a few years ago that Britain might top 40 degrees Celsius in July, a lot of people would have laughed in your face. Indeed, this continent has been warming at twice the global rate, according to the World Meteorological Organization, with the hottest October on record. So is the EU, which negotiates as one bloc at climate talks, stepping up to the plate at COP27? Well, my guests are Lydia Pereira, a Portuguese social democrat, member of the European People's Party here at the European Parliament. Welcome to you. Also, I'd like to welcome Bas Eickhout, a Dutch politician and member of the group of the Greens, European Free Alliance. Welcome to you as well. Bas, if I could start with you, you've been very critical about what you call failures to increase ambition since the last COP in Glasgow. You've said it's been a year of missed opportunities. Maybe you could elaborate a bit on that.
Well, I think we all remember a bit the kind of the pressure that was built towards Glasgow last year, and everyone was saying this should be the year of higher ambition. Unfortunately, the result of Glasgow was that, okay, we saved the 1.5 degrees, staying below this 1.5 degrees, by giving us another year. So basically we said now the year of truth was in Glasgow, but was then postponed for another year. If you then look on what happened in this year, of course, a huge war in Europe broke out. There's an energy crisis, and suddenly the climate issue has slowly disappeared from the agenda, although the impacts have made it very clear how devastating the impacts are. And if you now look in the world, how many countries are ready to use that additional year for higher ambition? It's some African countries, but to be very honest, that's not the high emitters. It's Australia because of a new government, and that's it. So we have a problem that the Glasgow result has not materialized in increased action where it's so needed, where it's really so needed.
Lydia Pereira, but you argue that actually Europe is doing a lot already and is not just in terms of climate ambition, but climate finance and things like that.
Absolutely. Europe, and we should say this proudly, Europe is the only geography in the world that is truly committed in fighting climate change. And that materializes or translates in the actions that we have been putting forward. If we look about if we think about the 50 to 55 for 55 package, it's a good example of that, but also on climate financing, as you rightly pointed. I think the role of Europe has been always a leader on this topic, but I would agree with Bas that the COP27 will have to be the translation into action of the achievements of COP26. Because if not, then we will be wasting another 2 weeks of negotiations that will have a very negative result on the most affected areas in the globe by climate change. There's already several irreversible effects of climate change. I come from a country, from Portugal. The Iberian Peninsula will be one of the most affected areas, regions, as pointed out by the IPCC report. So if we really don't make the others on board, and the others I'm referring to the US, India and China, we will be compromising the globe in the near future.
I'd like to get both of your thoughts on what is perhaps the most contentious issue between the developed world, if we can call it that, and the global south, which is losses and damages at the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh. Do you think there should be a formal facility that the EU, for example, should, whether it actually does it or not, but that it should commit to that, or is that just a bottomless pit of spending?
It would be positive if we arrange it, if we lead it. We know that the situation is quite critical, but so far, the COP started already a few days ago. So far, there's been a lot of prominence from mostly from African countries to push for this, because actually they're very much affected by climate change. And I think it would be very positive if we globally achieve this objective. But also on the other hand, the 100 billion climate fund, we also have to make some steps towards that because it's still pending. And I think it would be also relevant to materialize this into something.
Bas, your thoughts on loss and damages?
It will be the key point for the final week in Sharm el-Sheikh. This has been on the agenda for many years now, right? I mean, we're talking about it now, but it has been on the climate agenda for years.
Yeah.
And basically, the rich countries have promised to do something with that, but until now did not really get further than promising on a dialogue.
Yeah.
So the official position of the EU is also we support a dialogue on loss and damage.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's not sufficient. That's not sufficient because, and that's what you said, loss and damage is happening. There are now countries suffering from climate impacts. And so it's not a theoretical discussion.
As well, if I may, just to add to Bas, as well as the adaptation to climate change.
Exactly.
There's these 2 points that I would like to highlight. Usually adaptation to climate change in oceans are not very much spoken about. And they're crucial because last year we were both at COP26 and we had an interesting meeting with the Minister for Environment from Maldives, where she told us we spend 40% of our state budget to adaptation to climate change. Yeah. So as I said earlier, a lot of climate change effects are already irreversible. So we also have to arrange other means to get to the communities and to the stakeholders to be prepared to deal with this new reality.
The problem is, I mean, neither states nor energy companies are going to be willing to open themselves up for lawsuits. That's really the key thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's not on the agenda. Yeah? This is the liability. That's not on the agenda. Of course, some countries would love to go into that discussion. But I think we, as Europe, should make very clear, let's not get into a kind of a liability debate, because that's an endless debate and we will get stuck. So it's a dead-end street also for them. However, still there needs to be a facility so that there is access to finances. There's technology transfer. It's not only financing, it's also about, you know, in Pakistan, we talked to the minister last week, and he was also saying, we just want knowledge in order to recreate our infrastructure that is more resilient against climate impact. So in that sense, because if we just put the road back as it was, then it will be flooded again next year. So there's much more than just money.
What Bas is saying is also is relevant. Last year, COP26, there was a lot of expectations. Then the result was not entirely what we wanted, but I remember the European Parliament's position was fairly achieved. But one of the points that was achieved as well in COP26 was the knowledge exchange between the US and China. And I think it's a good example of how we should try to promote. It's not only about climate financing, it's crucial, it's very important, but also the exchange of best practices between countries, I think, are also very important to make this transition.
What about best practices within the European Union? I mean, what should the EU do to change its own energy policy to be more credible at these international talks? We don't have a lot of time, Lydia, but if you could just talk to us a bit about energy corridors, which is something that you've worked on a lot.
Yeah, I think that it is very important that the European Union, keeps its track for an energy union and avoids bilateral agreements between member states. So I'm referring in particular to the agreement that was achieved between Portugal, Spain and France. Emmanuel Macron showed again selfishness in this approach, because he portrays himself as the pro-European voice in a very much nationalized, sometimes European political debate. But it is not true. He forgot that we have to achieve an energy union to be completely independent from third countries on the energy sourcing.
You talk about selfishness, but doesn't the gas that is under question here, doesn't it go from Spain to France, but then on to other countries beyond France?
Well, it was completely neglected and sidelined. The projects for renewable energy coming from wind and solar panels that need electrical interconnections. And those two projects that go through Pyrenees were completely sidelined from the final agreement. It's important to remind that solar energy and wind power are the cheapest in the market, and the plans from France to invest in further energy, in nuclear energy, are completely out of the scope of what our objectives in terms of energy in the European Union should be.
Bas, bilateral energy deals versus energy union, what do you think?
it's very clear from the war in Russia is how vulnerable Europe is if we only have bilateral contacts.
Yeah.
That's what happened with Russia. All these bilateral contracts we were having were building a huge dependency on one country. Now the countries have learned from that with Russia and then turned to other bilateral contracts. Then you're not learning it. I do think, and I absolutely agree with Lydia, we need a European approach for our energy system. And here indeed France, Macron calls himself Europe, but his idea of Europe is just that France can export its nuclear. That is his European plan, period. It doesn't go further than that, because he is afraid of the cheap renewables from Spain and Portugal. And that's why he wants to keep the electricity market closed, because otherwise he knows his nuclear will be out of business.
Yeah.
So really, this shows that as long as we have 27 member states only going for their 27 own interest, we will remain dependent of other countries and our energy revolution will not succeed. And then we do not have a good story in Sharm el-Sheikh, because then we are not delivering on a clean energy system where Europe should deliver on.
Exactly, and we might be dependent or fall in the dependency from third countries that are also unstable politically, and I'm referring, for example, to Libya. Which also it's not. We should have learned our lesson from our approach towards China in terms of energy. So I would really like to see the European Union not making the same mistakes as in the past.
I think that's a good place to end it. So I'd like to thank my guests, Lydia Pereira and Bas Eickhout, and we'll be back very soon for another edition of Talking Europe. Thank you for watching.